Some men don't control you with shouting, threats, or obvious cruelty. If they did, it would be easy to leave. Instead, they control you quietly through confusion, guilt, emotional pressure, and carefully timed behavior that makes you question yourself more than you question them. And the dangerous part is that these tactics rarely look dramatic while you're inside them. They look like normal relationship problems. They look like misunderstandings. They look like stress, bad timing, or emotional wounds. But once you learn to recognize these patterns, you start seeing something very different. You start seeing mind games. And once you see them clearly, it becomes much harder for anyone to use them on you again. Here are 7 pathetic mind games weak men use to manipulate you, and why the smartest move is often to walk away instead of trying to fix them. The first mind game is silent punishment. This is when he suddenly withdraws emotionally without explanation. Messages become short or disappear. His tone becomes cold. Conversations stop. When you ask what's wrong, he either says nothing or acts like you should already know. This silence isn't peaceful distance, it's pressure, because the emotional gap creates anxiety, and that anxiety pushes you into trying to restore harmony as quickly as possible. You start apologizing even if you're not sure what you did. You start softening your tone, lowering your needs, and trying harder just to bring the warmth back. Over time, this teaches you that any disagreement risks emotional abandonment. Silence becomes the leash, and the more you rush to fix it, the more powerful that leash becomes. The second mind game is the blame flip. This happens whenever you bring up a real concern and somehow end up defending yourself instead. You try to talk about something that hurt you, and suddenly the conversation turns into how you approached it the wrong way, how you misunderstood, or how you're too sensitive. Instead of addressing the issue, the focus shifts onto your reaction. This tactic slowly trains you to question your own judgment. You start preparing your words carefully before speaking. You start wondering whether your expectations are unreasonable. And the more often this happens, the more emotional responsibility shifts from him onto you. Eventually, raising concerns feels exhausting, so you stop bringing them up entirely. That silence doesn't mean the relationship improved. It means the manipulation worked. The third mind game is the hot and cold cycle. 1 week, he's attentive, affectionate, and emotionally present. He messages first. He makes plans. He treats you like you matter deeply. Then suddenly, without clear reason, he becomes distant, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. When you react to this change, he may accuse you of overthinking or being needy. But what this cycle actually creates is emotional dependency. Because the good version of him feels so real and so strong when it appears, you start chasing that version whenever it disappears. The brain becomes focused on restoring the positive phase instead of evaluating the overall pattern. Intermittent kindness can feel more addictive than consistent stability. And that addiction keeps many people attached far longer than they would stay in a relationship that was simply bad all the time. The fourth mind game is fake vulnerability used as a shield. This is when he shares emotional stories about past trauma, betrayal, or being hurt before, not as part of honest growth, but as a way to excuse present behavior. Whenever you question something he does, the conversation shifts toward his past pain. Suddenly, the focus becomes comforting him instead of addressing the current issue. You start feeling guilty for expecting consistency from someone who has been through so much. Slowly, you move into the role of emotional caretaker instead of equal partner. Your patience increases, your boundaries soften, and your expectations shrink because you don't want to seem insensitive. But real vulnerability leads to accountability. Fake vulnerability leads to repeated excuses. The fifth mind game is future promises without present action. He talks about trips you'll take someday, plans you'll build later, or changes he'll make once things settle down. The future always sounds hopeful, detailed, and emotionally reassuring. But in the present, nothing actually improves. Effort doesn't increase. Communication doesn't stabilize. Commitment doesn't move forward. The future becomes a comforting story that keeps you emotionally invested while the present remains unchanged. Hope becomes the rope that ties you to a situation that would otherwise feel obvious. Because as long as the future sounds promising, it becomes easier to tolerate what's missing right now. The sixth mind game is comparison control. This one often appears subtly. He mentions other women in ways that create insecurity. He comments on how someone else wouldn't complain as much, wouldn't need as much reassurance, or would be easier to deal with. Sometimes it's disguised as a joke. Sometimes it's framed as advice. But the psychological effect is the same. Your focus shifts from evaluating his behavior to proving your worth. Instead of asking whether he's treating you well, you start trying to be better so he won't lose interest. Confidence quietly erodes while effort increases, and the more your self-confidence drops, the easier it becomes for manipulation to continue. The seventh and most powerful mind game is the victim performance, and this is where the entire pattern often becomes clear. The seventh and most powerful mind game is the victim performance. And this is where the entire pattern often becomes clear. This is the man who always has a story about how everyone else hurt him. Every ex was toxic. Every friend betrayed him. Every job treated him unfairly. Every argument somehow proves that the world misunderstands him. At first, this can sound like honesty. It can even create sympathy. You feel like you're finally the person who will understand him when no one else did. But over time, something strange happens. Whenever problems appear in your own relationship, the same pattern repeats. Somehow, he is still the misunderstood one, and you slowly become the next person who doesn't get him. This is not coincidence. It's a mindset that protects him from ever taking responsibility, because if everyone else was always the villain, then he never has to examine his own behavior. And once you realize that every past story places him as the innocent victim, you start seeing the warning clearly. If every relationship ended because of the other person, the common denominator may not be who he dated. It may be him. Here's the deeper truth behind all of these mind games. Weak manipulation rarely looks aggressive. It looks confusing. It looks emotional. It looks like someone who just needs more understanding, more patience, or more time. That's why so many strong, kind women stay far longer than they should. They aren't staying because they enjoy the situation. They're staying because they believe clarity will come if they just communicate better. They believe stability will return if they just support him more. They believe the good moments represent the real version of him, and the bad moments are temporary. But manipulation survives exactly because it mixes just enough kindness with just enough confusion to keep hope alive. Another reason these tactics work is because they slowly train you to focus inward instead of outward. Instead of asking, "Is he treating me well?" you start asking, "Am I reacting correctly?" Instead of evaluating his consistency, you evaluate your patience. Instead of noticing the repeated pattern, you analyze individual moments. And that shift in focus is what keeps the cycle alive. Because the more you monitor yourself, the less you question the system itself. It's also important to understand that these behaviors often don't feel dramatic at the beginning. They build gradually. A little silence here, a small blame shift there, a few emotional stories, a few future promises. Each moment feels small enough to excuse individually, but manipulation rarely depends on one large event. It depends on repeated small events that slowly reshape your expectations. What once felt unacceptable starts feeling normal. What once felt hurtful starts feeling understandable. And by the time the pattern becomes obvious, your emotional investment is already deep, making it harder to leave. This is where many people make the same painful mistake. They think recognizing the pattern means they now have the power to fix it. They believe that if they explain the behavior clearly enough, show enough emotional insight, or demonstrate enough patience, the other person will suddenly become self-aware and change. But manipulation patterns are not sustained by lack of understanding. They are sustained by lack of accountability. Someone who benefits from emotional control rarely gives it up simply because you described it accurately. Awareness alone does not create change. Willingness does. And willingness cannot be forced from the outside. That's why the title of this isn't just about recognizing the mind games. It's about understanding why walking away is often the healthiest response. Because the longer you stay inside a system built on confusion, the more your own emotional clarity starts fading. You talk less to avoid conflict. You expect less to avoid disappointment. You explain less because past conversations led nowhere. Slowly, you become someone quieter, more cautious, more emotionally guarded, not because that's who you are, but because that's who the environment trained you to become. Walking away is not about punishing the other person. It's about protecting the version of yourself that existed before the manipulation began, the version of you that spoke openly, the version of you that trusted your instincts, the version of you that didn't feel like every emotional reaction needed approval or justification. Leaving doesn't always feel powerful in the moment. Sometimes it feels terrifying. Sometimes it feels like failure. But staying inside a pattern that slowly erodes your confidence costs far more over time than the temporary pain of stepping out of it. And here is the final thing most people realize only after they're out. Healthy relationships do not require constant emotional decoding. They don't require you to analyze tone, guess intentions, or prepare for silent punishment. They don't require endless reassurance that your normal needs are valid. Stability feels calmer than manipulation. Communication feels clearer. Effort feels mutual. And once you experience that difference, the mind games that once felt confusing start looking exactly like what they always were. Signs that someone was more focused on maintaining control than building connection. The moment you stop trying to win emotional games you never agreed to play, you start reclaiming the clarity that manipulation tried to take from you. And that clarity is usually the first step back toward relationships where you don't have to shrink just to stay.